All right, we are ready for our next topic on Dad's family history, and today is going to be about Dad's military service. Um, so let's just start, Dad. Let's start at the beginning. Do you want to talk about how you came to serve in the military? Did you want to do it? Did you volunteer to do it? Were you forced to do it? Talk about the beginnings of that.
Uh, so probably just the historical contents. I just realized how old I am. For a long time, when I would say Vietnam, people go, "Oh yeah, you know, that's a big topic. Were you there?" and everything else. And now, as I'm older and talking to people of your generation, it's like, "Oh yeah, I think I remember that from a history book."
Right.
So uh, I went to Berkeley. That's where really campus protests started, really. And was over free speech. They had a bunch of demands. They got them all, and they go, "Oh, we need to find another cause." And they go, "The Vietnam War." And I was like, I just barely heard of that. And that's really when it hit the public consciousness. So,
Mm.
so I
Yeah.
was berkeley 64, 65. So it was really the second semester of 65. That's when protests started there. And then uh, next couple of years, it spread all over the country. Very, history wise, the only war that the US has ever fought in that was anywhere near over 90% popular was World War II because we were attacked.
Mm.
Yeah. Even the Revolutionary War wasn't that high of a percentage. And if you wanted to talk about the most unpopular war that we fought, it was probably Vietnam. So
Yeah.
anyway, that was the context. It kept ratcheting up. I When I was on my mission, there was like, and it really ratcheted up. People were getting drafted. I had fellow missionaries that were nervous about being called home for the
Yeah.
draft. And the church and the selective service, which is the draft thing, negotiated a deal for missionaries to have deferments until they came home.
Okay.
And it ratcheted up so much that by the time I finished my uh, 2.5 years, it was pretty sure I was going to get drafted. And that's when I came home, I flew from Norway to Salt Lake. Uh, Salt Lake City, took a bus down to BYU, registered, and then I had to register before I went home. Let me get a quick drink because my mouth's so dry. Just a
Yep. Yep.
second. That was really the only reason I went to BYU, is they had what was called a block program, which was half a semester, and it was basically made for return missionaries.
Okay.
And then I went there for a while and went, "Oh, I like it here. This is a nice place, and I want to get married sometime, and I got a lot better odds here than Berkeley." So,
Yeah.
and then the draft kept heating up, and it was kind of chaotic as to who was going to get drafted when. And then the U.S. came up with the idea of a national lottery, and that was where they drew birth dates out of a kind of like the old NBA draft,
Right. Right.
and took them out, and where you would have a draft number, and then your draft board would draft in that order. And it
Okay.
was pretty much, you would only get, you if you were 26, you probably weren't going to get drafted. It was under.
Okay.
Uh, so we watched it all on TV, and
Wow.
you at school the next day, you could walk around and look at guys' faces and tell whether they had a really low or really high number. So,
Yeah.
when my dad served in World War II, he and a lot of other people, felt very patriotic and enlisted because they wanted to defend against the Japanese and the Germans and stuff. There was no feeling of that for uh, Vietnam at all. In
Hmm.
fact, for a lot of people who uh, very popular place was to go to Canada. So, I,
Yeah.
are you familiar with what extradition is?
Right. Yeah.
So that was Canada did not believe in the war either, and so they would not extradite an American citizen back to the U.S. to be
Right.
prosecuted for evading the draft.
Yeah.
And the other one that kind of puts it in context, when I was on my mission and there was opposition to us as missionaries, it was really more, rather than anti-Christian or anti-church, it was anti-US.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yeah. And a really good example, you've been around people who are members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. When you Bible bash with them, it's always about the seventh day. In Norway, it was not about the Sabbath day, it was about the Adventists are pacifists. So
Oh, interesting. Okay.
they wanted to argue about the Vietnam War rather than Saturday versus
Hmm.
Sunday. That just shows you how intense it was.
Hmm.
So when they had the draft numbers, my brother Drew was, I think, 361. So he was like,
Okay.
my number was 182. I was
Okay.
almost exactly in the middle.
Yeah.
My brother Ron was 186.
Hmm.
Our draft board in Sacramento County went to 185 and stopped.
Oh my goodness.
So he missed by one. I I knew a guy in our stake who was on the draft board. He wasn't going to do me any favors, but nice guy. I just said, hey, what are my chances of getting drafted? And he goes, 100%. I
Hmm.
said, okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that. So I had deferments that I used. One was the uh, missionary. I used that one. Hardship deferment because I was supporting myself, was married and had
Hmm.
Michael. And then the deferments ran out.
Okay.
I knew some people who were in the Army Reserves. So the way the draft worked then, if you go in the Army, it's a 6-year commitment. If you're drafted, you go serve for 2 years. And then your 4 years of inactive reserves, which means you could be called up, but not.
Okay.
If you volunteer, you serve for 3 years of active. And then you have 3 years of uh, inactive where you're not going to meetings. If you could get into the Army Reserves or the National Guard, which is kind of the same thing, you serve for the 6 years, you go to basic training and advanced training, and then you go to meetings for 6 years. So
Okay.
I never considered fleeing to Canada, but
Yeah.
I did not want to go get shot at.
Yeah.
So me and everybody else wanted to get into the Army Reserves. It
Hmm.
was really hard to get in. I kept applying.
Because you knew if you got into the armies or army reserves, you likely wouldn't serve in combat.
Right. So So I would apply, they'd turn it down. I'd apply, they'd turn it down. And they kept turning me down because I had a dependent, Michael,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
which is just the normal perverse government logic. They're going, you can't go in the Army Reserves and go to summer camp for 2 weeks because because we don't pay you much for those 2 weeks. Uh, and you can't support a dependent. But we could draft you and you could serve for 2 or 3 years. It's like that's just backwards government logic.
Sure. Yeah.
So I had this thing hanging over my head. I graduated. I wanted to go back and get my master's, but I couldn't because I expected to get drafted at any time. So I finally just decided, I found there was another option. I could volunteer for the draft, which
Oh,
is different
interesting.
than enlisting. If you enlist, you'd have the chance to pick some specialty where you might not go to Vietnam, but then you got to serve for 3 years. If you volunteer for the draft, you're for sure going to Vietnam. But then at least I knew my timing. And
Hmm.
I had the possibility of 6 months of training, go to Vietnam. Basically, if you went to Vietnam, you only had to stay there a year. And so guys would go, do their 6 months, go to Vietnam for a year, come back. Instead of 6 more months active, the government would put them on inactive. So I was like, okay, that's my best shot. Just
Hmm.
get it out of the way. And I was about to volunteer and I got approved for the
Oh,
Navy.
for the reserves. Okay.
Yeah. And then 2 years later, I get this monthly magazine, you know, Army Reserve News. Who cares? But I just
Right.
was glancing through it a couple years later. And there's this picture of this guy in uniform, his wife, and their kid. And it was the first person with a dependent that supposedly they had ever let into the reserves. And
Wow.
I'd been in for 2 years. So, so some people say, oh, God was watching over you. And I go, I don't like that explanation. That that means, some guy who went in and got killed, but God
He
didn't like
wasn't watching
me, he
over him.
liked me. So
Right. Yeah.
anyway, so that was my army. Uh, that's how
So
I got.
you waited, so you got into the reserves right before you were going to volunteer for the draft, and then and then how many more years until you actually started serving?
Oh, I started serving in immediately.
Okay.
Within a week. I wasn't certain when I would go to uh, my basic training, and that took a couple of months. Uh, so I couldn't go back to school for that because I needed to know when that started.
Right.
And yeah, so when that started, and I served my 5 months of training, and I can describe that and got back, then it's like, okay, now I can go back to school
Okay.
because I went to I went to Provo for BYU. I just had one more semester to get a master's degree. And then I just did weekend meetings right there in Provo.
Got it.
The Army let me transfer. So, and again, just perverse Army logic. When I got called up to basic training, you could go anywhere in the US. Well, people who got drafted or enlisted in California went to Fort Ord, which is, down by Monterey, because that's the most efficient. I mean, they sent me to New Jersey. So just, and
Right.
sometimes people would go uh, to their basic training, which is like 8 or 9 weeks, to the same place where they'd have their advanced training, and they would go to advanced training, where that was located. I was just going to be a company clerk,
Okay.
which training existed everywhere. And
Yeah.
so I did my company clerk training, which was OJT, on the job training, uh, in Fort Knox, Kentucky.
So this was okay. So when you got into the reserves, you immediately started, and you immediately started your basic training?
No, I
Or
immediately started going to meetings.
you went to meetings, and then how much longer until you started basic training?
Probably 4 or 5 months.
And it's okay, that was 4 or 5 months later. And that's what was in Kentucky?
That was half in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and
Got
half
it.
in
And then the
Fort
rest.
Knox, Kentucky. And
And
I
then and
left.
what
I left in June. I remember it well because Mike had just turned 1 and just started to walk.
got it. Okay. And what did basic training consist of?
Basic training is just like the movies. You know,
Okay.
just I liked it. I mean, it was really hard,
Yeah.
and they were really mean to you and stuff, but it all made perfect sense. You just
Yeah.
learn discipline. You need to follow orders. You've got to be in really good shape. Everything that you did made sense, even if it didn't make sense, if that makes sense. You just
Okay.
follow orders and you don't question and anything else.
And so was the main thrust of it getting you physically and mentally ready, or like
Physically and mentally ready and training you to be obedient. So I had
Okay.
bayonet training, shooting, throwing live hand grenades, just stuff that would prepare you for war. And
Yeah.
drill sergeant that yelled at you and called you names. And that's where I learned the things that I talked about. I learned to say, when somebody's mad at you and they got authority of you, your response is, I have no excuse, drill sergeant.
Yeah.
Because then there's nothing else they could say.
Yeah. Yes, sir. No,
What's
sir.
wrong
No
with you,
excuse, sir.
Stoddard? Don't you know your left foot from your right foot? And you instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, I was this. I want you to say, so they can yell at you some more. And you just go, I'm sorry, drill sergeant. I have no excuse. So
Okay, so that was
I liked it in a sense. And probably what put it into perspective was when I became a company clerk. And company clerk is a great job because you're in charge of paperwork. So your commanding officer does not bully you because he doesn't want you to mess up his paperwork.
yeah.
So there were all these rules you had to learn. When you were outside, if there was an officer, you had to salute him and stuff. Inside, you had to salute certain officers, but not the lower ones. And when you met an officer in the bathroom, it was kind of different rules because you didn't have to salute while you were trying to take a leak.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did not have a bad attitude, but one time I was sitting there uh, at my desk doing paperwork, and an officer walked in. I think he was a colonel or something. I said, "Yeah, may I help you, sir?" And then he laughed, and whatever my commanding officer called me, he goes, "Stoddard, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to stand and salute." And I went, "Oh, yeah, sorry, sir, I have no excuse." And he goes, "Stoddard, you just don't really care about any of this stuff, do you?" And I go, "No, sir, I don't." So and it was like
Was he
there was nothing he could say. So,
was he offended by that, or did he find that
no,
humorous, or was he
no.
offended by?
Again, it was the
Yeah.
same thing. I did. I worked really hard. I didn't cause him problems like stealing stuff or doing drugs or whatever, but I
Yeah.
just really wasn't into the whole thing.
Yeah. So,
It's kind
okay.
of like, too, even as you will learn the hard way as your kids get to be teenagers, you can't punish somebody for a bad attitude. It goes
Right.
nowhere.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So what
that was really the whole crux of the army. He said, Stoddard, you just don't care about this, do you? No, sir, I don't.
so so describe what a typical day was like then in basic training. What would a day consist of?
So it was every day we'd get up at like 5 and fall into formation, hurry and wait, a lot of marching, rifle training, and everything else. If you were sick, which a lot of people got sick because the hours were just so ridiculous, not that we couldn't squeeze it all in. It's just that, they want us to be tough, sleep and
Yeah.
train, wake up at 3 in the morning and everything else. So if you felt like you were sick, first of all, you didn't want to be sick because you were afraid, oh my gosh, if I'm sick a couple of days, I'll wash out and they'll start me over. And it's like,
Oh,
I
wow.
want to do this again. So if you felt sick, you had to wake up, shower, get dressed, stand out in formation, and then they'd have sick call. And if you had sick call, you'd raise your hand and go to sick call. Well, by then you've been up 2 hours. You might as well just go
Keep
through it.
going.
And basic training was 8 weeks. And there's always rumors like, oh, they're going to make it 12 weeks. And after a while, I figured out they're not going to make it 12 weeks because by the time 8 weeks rolls around, you figured out, okay, This is what they can get away with. This is what they can't. And
Yeah.
they can't buffalo you, for another 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So it was just very intense and very hard. But again, in hindsight and even the time, it all made sense. You wouldn't want to go to Vietnam and your commanding officer says, we're going here, we're going there, you do that, and have a guy go, I think we should do something else, or why are we doing that? It's
Right.
like,
Right.
no, do it. And
Yeah.
and you never let go of your rifle. If you called it your gun, you got in trouble. But you
Hmm.
never let go of it, or else you were running laps, or as they called it, pushing Fort Dix, which is doing push-ups, pushing Fort Dix.
Uh, okay.
That made sense. When you're on patrol in Vietnam, you don't set down your rifle. You always hold.
Right.
So even at the time, you go, no, that's logical
Why couldn't you call it your gun?
because it's a rifle and because they said so.
Okay.
You could have
Okay.
said
And
the
that
other
was
way. It's not. It's not a rifle. It's a gun. So
right.
it's because that's the rule.
And that was 8 weeks long, or that was five
I
months
think it
long.
was either 8 or 9 weeks.
Okay. But that so that was basic training, but then you had another 3 months of what?
But 2.5 months. Uh, so a lot of times people would go to school for whatever they were going to do.
Okay.
Mine was clerk, but other than clerk school, it was just OJT, on the job training.
Got it. Okay.
So we would just go type and file and learn and stuff.
And during that time then, because you were in the reserves, you did you felt like it was a pretty low likelihood that you were actually going to serve in combat,
Yeah.
or did you
Our
have fear of
particular
that?
unit, the mobilization plan for our unit was if we were called up, because you can get called up in the uh, Army Reserves or the National Guard. National Guard's usually called up for like hurricanes and stuff like that.
Right.
Uh, if there would have been a call up, the full-time Army guys in Fort Ord would would be called to Vietnam to fight, and our unit would be called to Fort Ord to train.
Okay.
The Army could have changed their mind. We could have called up to Vietnam, but that wasn't the mobilization plan. So if
Okay.
it would have been activated, so our unit, which is whatever, 30 guys, there was, a couple of cooks, a couple of clerks, most of them were drill sergeants. So they would have been called to Fort Ord to be drill sergeants. So that's,
Okay. Hmm.
yeah. So it worked like it was supposed to work. And then for the rest of the 5 years, I'd go to a meeting once a month on a Saturday and Sunday. And then I would go 2 weeks to summer camp at Fort Ord, which is where I was.
Okay.
And then I served the whole 6 years.
So that you finished your 5 months of training on the job training and the basic training, and then after that, uh, so you didn't ever really live in fear of like, am I going to get called up? What's going to happen? You pretty much
Oh,
know that it was a low
yeah,
likelihood.
right. That would
Okay.
have been a massive change to call our unit up to uh, Vietnam. And even if they would, I probably wouldn't have been a grunt. I'd have been a clerk.
Yeah. Okay.
But, I mean, I
Was
still could have been bombed and shot at. But
Sure. Was that scary for mom? Did she feel calm about that, or was she worried you might get called up, or what was that? What was
yeah,
that
she was
dynamic
pretty
like?
calm about it.
Yeah.
Part of it is, part of it is the whole Vietnam thing was just so pervasive and everybody's thinking and everything else.
Right.
Anybody can get called up, and a lot of people were getting killed. My odds were, because I got in the reserves, they were a whole lot better than a lot of other people. So,
Okay.
it was a matter of comparison.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's like, even today, it's like, am I a veteran? No, I don't have veterans benefits, which is fine. but so I'm technically not a veteran.
And why is that? Because you didn't actively serve in combat, or
Uh,
why?
they just, the Army has decided that people who skated that way didn't actually serve full time enough to have
Hmm.
VA benefits, which actually to me makes sense. So
Yeah.
the the 2 weeks I was in summer camp, I was then active, and your mom could then go to the PX, which is the base exchange, and buy food at a discount and stuff. So
Okay.
I had I had that. She had that when I was gone.
But was there
When
a
I came
stick?
back, when I came back, and she picked me up at the airport, that's when Mike walked beside. He wasn't afraid of me, but he just looked at me like, I don't know who you are, but you look really familiar. So, because that was
Be-
from 12 months to 17 months. That was a big part
and
of
I
it.
and I was going to ask that. So you didn't see them at all during those five
No,
months.
no. I could
And
have.
how was that?
I could have.
Yeah.
She could have come back to uh, Fort Knox or Fort Dix to visit, but like, yeah, no bother. It was interesting in basic training. Basic training was 7 days a week,
Okay.
but you could get off. The Army would not mess with you if you wanted to go to church.
Okay.
So everybody, LDS,
Everybody was
got very
suddenly
religious.
religious.
They were
Yeah.
religious.
Right.
So a half a day on Sunday, they get to go to church. So
Right.
everybody got religious.
Was that hard for mom having you gone for that long, or how did that go?
Yeah, it was. But again, in comparison, she would know other uh, women whose husbands were in Vietnam, and I wasn't.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not. She's not going to get the like we got with Brent later. Not Barbara, but Conley and I. You're not going to get that dreaded knock on the door in the middle of the night.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So it was hard being gone, but you knew I was safe and stuff.
Yeah. So, what I was going to ask earlier, the when you said you don't have veteran, you're not recognized as a veteran. Was there a stigma against it at the time? The fact that you volunteered for the reserves, or how was that viewed at the time?
Not really, because the stigma was really the whole thing. That's now generally, it's like every time I take a flight. All right, free boards, military with active duty, you get on first. And it's always the same thing. Thank you for your service. At that time, it wouldn't have been quite this bad, but almost this bad. Military, you board last.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, guys would come back from Vietnam being shot at, and people would spit at them
Wow.
because people couldn't connect in their mind. The politicians who decided that we go to war and people
Right.
get hurt, it's not that way now. Generally, if you're in the service, you have a lot of respect, even if you served in Afghanistan, where people think it was horrible, and it probably is or was.
Yeah.
There was this terrible disconnect. So
Oh, wow.
stigma was just being in the military period, which
Okay.
I still think it's terrible. Guys that deserve risk their life. Some of them come back, missing an arm or a leg, and then people hate them as a symbol of a war that people hate.
Yeah.
I don't know what
Backwards.
happened to the US. You don't have that now.
Yeah. Interesting.
People just respect people in the military, even though they think we're fighting places we shouldn't fight.
Yeah. So the talk about so after you were out, or after those 5 months, you still did you say once a month you did a weekend thing?
Once a month, I had to go to weekend meetings, which is just really boring. And
I
then
was going to ask, yeah, what were the meetings? Were they training, or were they being updated on something, or what did the meetings consist of?
it was supposedly training uh, for the drill sergeant guys. For me, I was a clerk. I already knew what to do. So
Okay.
it was a lot of All right, we're almost halfway done. So
Okay.
but you had to look busy, so you couldn't read a book. So
Okay.
basic or 2 weeks of summer camp, that was 6 movies a week.
Oh, really?
Every day but Sunday, just to kill time. So, and it was always an interesting juxtaposition. So I'm at home. I've got, I'm working, got a big family, big church job. There's never enough time for anything. And all of a sudden, 2 weeks, you're trying to kill time. It's
Yeah,
just so odd. Yeah.
yeah, interesting. Okay, so distilling it down then, what are the biggest lessons learned from your military service? What do you, or in what ways do you feel like it shaped your personality or your character?
I think it shaped me a lot because of the discipline, the organization. Uh, it helped me, even though it felt good to serve and you're serving your country, it helped me confirm my life choices as far as work. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, that's really not, I want to do other kinds of things. It was like Jerry Hutchkin,
Yeah,
he served in the Air Force. A lot of that was off of my suggestion. I just said, Terry, I've been in the military. That fits you perfectly. And it did. You should have stayed in, but yeah.
yeah,
Some people go in the military for medical training, IT training, auto repair. The Army always has the best of everything.
right.
Yeah.
So but you say your discipline and organization, you feel like that, because it seems like from what you're saying from your mission experience, you were pretty disciplined heading into that, but that made you more disciplined or organized, you feel like?
Well, more disciplined, like taking orders without question, being
Okay.
part of a group, understanding how that works,
Yeah.
understanding like, you can't be a free thinker and an innovator in certain circumstances and stuff like that. And and really, I had an appreciation of our whole defense thing and how it works. It's like, yeah, it's not what I wanted to do, and it's not
Right.
because I'm above it, too smart or too whatever. Just it didn't kind of fit my thing at
Yeah.
all. I mean, I didn't even want to be somebody's employee. So
Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Which is interesting because you're that, um, doesn't fit your personality where you want someone to manage you, but that's also the biggest lessons it sounds like you learned of how to be managed, how to fall in
yeah,
line if you needed to.
yeah, yeah. And that lesson was further reinforced in prison, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Interesting.
just like prison, there's things when I got out of prison that I missed, you know.
Right.
Just this,
About that life. Yeah.
yeah, just the simplicity and the order. It's kind of like I saw a cartoon that's once was great. It was it was a guy sitting on his bunk, kind of deep in thought, and he goes, "I think I'll wear my green outfit today." You know, just just nothing to
Right.
think about. Just do what you're told. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Sometimes that's maddening, but other times it's like, no, life's really simple. Up,
Yeah.
bump,
Yeah.
and then
I can
just
see that.
learning. It's like the Stoddard, you don't really care. Just learning how to be a rebel, but not obnoxious at all. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. All right. Anything else about military service that we didn't cover?
What I think of. No.
Okay.
Let's see, what's there? No.
Okay.
So the one thing
I
I mentioned this before is just like between the military hanging over your head with Vietnam, and then going on a mission and not knowing how long your mission call was going to be, whether it was
Yeah.
2 years, 24 years, 20. I just find it an interesting comparison sometimes now when young men can kind of plan their lives and go, okay, I want to do this. I'm going to go here. I'm going to come back. I'm going to do this and do that. And we had this, we couldn't control mission because we didn't know how long. So you couldn't plan for that. And we just
Right.
had this big Vietnam umbrella over everything. And I don't think we had it harder and they have it easier. I just think, oh, it's just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't plan your life with as much precision then.
Yeah. Do they have harder things? It's like, I'm so glad I didn't grow up with the internet and all its temptations. It's like,
Right.
it's harder now. It's just interesting to me how different it is. And I just think
Yeah.
with my dad, who was 21 when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and it's just like, that just became your life. You
Yeah.
went to serve and you went, and you didn't even know how long you were going to be in. So,
Right.
so it's not hard or easier. It's just interesting how
Different.
it's defined.
Yeah.
And it'll be when I describe the draft to people who are young, like Isaiah's age, and it's like, just wrap his head around that. Like you could be forced to do something like that. It's like, oh,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It fits so foreign, but that was the norm. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think even Israel now, I think men and women all have to serve for a year, no matter what. So,
Right. Yeah. But it's a different reality than Americans are living in today.
yeah. So I can't think of anything else related
Okay.
to military. What's the
Okay.
next subject? What's the next subject?
Our next subject is joining Stoddard construction.
Okay.
So we will hit that one next.